The alarm started 3 seconds before the missile hit. Cale Wren didn't need 3 seconds, he'd learned to live on less. He slammed the throttle forward, and his salvage ship, the Wanderlust, screamed sideways through a debris field that had once been a shipping lane, dodging a warhead built by people who wanted him dead simply for existing. That was the strange part of his life. Not the running. The reason. He was human. As far as anyone in the galaxy knew, he was the only human left, and that made him worth more dead than any king, any general, any war criminal in the star charts. Bounty hunters didn't chase him for money, not really. They chased him because his skull, mounted on a wall, was a trophy no other hunter could ever match. The last of a species. A conversation piece for people who had never met a human and never would. He hated them for it. He hated himself a little too for being tired enough some nights to almost let them win. Not tonight. The second missile clipped his rear stabilizer, and the Wanderlust spun like a coin flicked across a table. Sparks bloomed across the cockpit. A proximity alert screamed a name he didn't recognize. A structure, ancient and massive, directly in his flight path. He didn't have a choice. He didn't have fuel, shields, or time. He pointed the nose at the wreck and prayed to whatever was left, listening for humanity. The impact should have killed him. Instead, the moment his hull kissed the outer plating of the derelict, something reached out and caught him. He felt it before he understood it. A deceleration too smooth to be physics, too deliberate to be luck. The Wanderlust slowed, cradled, and pulled inside a docking bay that had been dark for longer than written history. Lights the color of old blood flickered on along the walls, one section at a time, like a heart restarting after decades of silence. Kyle sat frozen in his cockpit, breathing hard, staring at a ship. No, not a ship, a structure that dwarfed anything he had ever salvaged, stolen, or fled from. It stretched beyond his sensors in every direction. Dead, or it should have been. "This isn't possible," he muttered. A voice answered him. Not through his comms. Through the air itself, vibrating in a language his mind translated before his ears even processed the sound. Genetic signature confirmed. "Welcome home, heir." He grabbed his sidearm, backed against the cockpit glass, heart slamming. "Who's there? Show yourself." Lights bloomed along a central column outside his ship, resolving into something like a hologram, something like a ghost. An old, dignified shape without a face, made of light and static and 3 centuries of patience. Designation: Vessel Prime. Steward Intelligence Dormant Cycle: 312 years, 4 months, 11 days. Query: Shall the inheritance proceed? "I don't know what that means," Cale said. "I don't know what you are. I need to leave, right now." "Departure is currently inadvisable," Vessel Prime said, and there was something almost like amusement folded into the words. "You are not alone, heir." That was when the second wave of alarms began. Not the ship's this time, but his own instincts, the ones that had kept him alive through 11 years of running. He turned to his rear sensor feed and watched 3 bounty hunter vessels breach the outer hull behind him, weapons already hot, boots already hitting the deck. They'd followed him in. Cale scrambled out of the cockpit into the vast, dim corridor beyond, sidearm raised, doing quick math on cover and angles the way he always did in the seconds before things went wrong. The lead hunter, a broad-shouldered mercenary named Draith with a reputation for collecting human bones as jewelry, rounded the corner first, rifle up, grin wide. "End of the line, Ghost," Draith said. "Whatever this place is, it's about to be your tomb." Kyle didn't answer. He was too busy watching the walls. Because the walls were answering for him, panels along the corridor split open with a hiss and something inside them woke up. Turrets, sleek and ancient, the metal humming with a low gold light that hadn't shone in centuries. They rotated with terrible precision, and Kyle realized with a chill crawling up his spine that they weren't aiming at him. They were aiming at Draith. "Wait," Draith started. He never finished the word. The corridor lit up in a storm of concentrated fire, precise and merciless, and in 4 seconds, it was over. Cale stood in the sudden silence, ears ringing. staring at what remained of 3 men who had hunted him across half the galaxy. He should have felt relief. He felt sick instead. "Threat neutralized," Vessel Prime said calmly, as if reporting the weather. "Heir, your safety is now the primary directive of this vessel. All defense subsystems are reactivating in accordance with your presence." "I didn't ask you to kill them," Kyle said, voice shaking. "You did not need to. Their intent toward the heir was unambiguous." Kyle lowered his weapon slowly, staring down the corridor at the massive structure stretching in every direction, lights waking section by section like veins filling with blood. "What is this place? What am I the heir of?" "That answer requires context you are not yet prepared to receive," Vessel Prime said. "What you must understand immediately is this. Your arrival has activated systems that were never meant to remain dormant this long, and your arrival has also been detected." "Detected by who?" "By everyone who has spent 3 centuries hoping this day would never come." The lights along the corridor pulsed once, harder, and a deep tremor rolled through the deck beneath Kale's boots. Not an explosion. Something bigger. Something waking up at the very core of the structure. Vast systems clicking into alignment after a sleep longer than most civilizations lasted. A screen unfolded from the nearest wall, alive with characters Kale had never seen in his life. And yet somehow, impossibly, he understood every symbol as if he'd been born reading them. A countdown. Numbers falling steadily toward 0, attached to words that settled into his chest like a stone. Inheritance protocol. Awaiting final confirmation. Initiating in Z00459, U00458. "What happens when it hits 0? Kyle asked, throat tight. Vessel Prime's light dimmed for a moment, almost like hesitation. "Then, heir, the galaxy will remember that humanity never actually died." Behind Kale, with a groan of ancient metal finally breaking its long silence, massive doors at both ends of the corridor began to seal shut, locking him inside with the wreckage of the men who had come to kill him, and whatever waited at the end of the countdown now sealed in with him. The countdown hit 0, and nothing exploded. Instead, the entire structure exhaled. Kyle felt it in his teeth before he heard it. A low, planet-deep hum rolling through every wall, every deck, every closed door around him. Lights that had been the color of dried blood shifted to a clean, steady white. Somewhere far above him, vast engines that had not fired in 3 centuries began, slowly, to turn over. "Inheritance protocol. Initiated," Vessel Prime announced. And for the first time its voice carried something Kale could only describe as relief. "Partial control transferred to confirmed heir. Congratulations, Kale Ren. You are now the rightful steward of this vessel." "Partial control of what exactly?" Kale snapped, still standing over the scorched remains of the men who had tried to kill him minutes ago. "You keep calling me heir. Heir to what?" "To a legacy your species forgot it ever owned." The wall beside him dissolved into a wide viewport, and Kale staggered back as he finally understood the scale of what had swallowed his ship. It wasn't a vessel. It was a moon-sized dreadnought, ancient beyond comprehension, its hull etched with patterns that looked disturbingly, achingly familiar, angles and curves that echoed old Earth blueprints he'd seen once in a childhood textbook, back before Earth was a word people said with pity or contempt. "This is human tech," Kale whispered. "Incorrect. And also, in the deepest sense, correct." Vessel Prime's light pulsed thoughtfully. "This vessel was constructed using foundational schematics gifted to your species roughly 9,000 years ago, by a race that no longer exists. A precursor civilization your historians never had the chance to document. They gave humanity the seed of this technology as a test. Humanity did not recognize the gift for what it was. It was buried, forgotten, and eventually lost to time, myth, and war." Kale's mind raced back to fragments of half-remembered folklore, old stories about gods who came down and gave gifts nobody understood, gifts that were later called curses. He'd always assumed they were just stories. "If we forgot it," he said slowly, "how did this get built?" "Others did not forget. When the precursors vanished, their rivals scoured the stars for anything the precursors had touched. They found humanity's buried gift long before humanity rediscovered it themselves. They stole what you didn't know you had, refined it, weaponized it, and eventually they decided the safest thing to do with the species who rightfully owned the technology was to erase it. The words landed like a physical blow. Cale's hand found the edge of a support strut, gripping it hard enough to hurt. "Earth," he said. "Earth." He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. Every human who'd survived the diaspora carried the same wound, the same 300-year-old scar. One day the sky over Earth had turned to fire and nothing anyone did afterward had mattered. He had grown up on stories from an uncle who barely escaped, stories that always stopped abruptly at the moment the flames started, because there was nothing after that worth telling. "Why me?" Cale asked, quieter now. "If I'm the last one, why does any of this matter?" "You misunderstand your own significance," Vessel Prime said. "Your bloodline was not random. It was protected, quietly, deliberately, across generations, by a faction who believed this day would eventually come. You were never simply the last survivor drifting through the wreckage of your species, Cale. You were being kept." Before Cale could process that, before he could even begin to ask by whom and for what purpose, every alarm in the massive dreadnought erupted at once. "Explain that," Cale said, already moving toward the nearest console out of pure instinct. 12 independent long-range distress and alert signals have just triggered across known space, Vessel Prime reported, its calm cracking for the first time into something like urgency. This vessel's reactivation was not subtle. Every faction monitoring dormant precursor technology has detected the inheritance protocol activating, which means, heir, everyone who has spent 3 centuries believing your species was extinct now knows they were wrong. Cale stared at the star map blooming across the console, watching dozens of unfamiliar signatures light up and begin adjusting course. Toward him. "That's bad," he said. "That is catastrophic," phrased politely, Vessel Prime replied. "There are empires among those signatures who built their entire political and territorial order on the assumption of humanity's extinction. Your continued existence does not merely surprise them, it threatens them." A new voice cut through the comm static then, not Vessel Prime's, not mechanical at all. A woman's voice, sharp with static and urgency, broadcasting on a frequency that shouldn't have reached this deep into the derelict. "Whoever just woke that thing up, you need to shut it down now," the voice said. "Do you have any idea what you just told the entire galaxy?" Cale grabbed the comm. "Who is this?" A pause, then quieter, almost disbelieving. You're actually human. Gods above. I didn't think. I need to get to you before anyone else does. There's a maintenance corridor on the ship's lower ring, Section 9. I can guide you out before the fleets arrive, but you have to trust me, and you have to move now." "Why would I trust a stranger who just appeared out of nowhere?" "Because the alternative is trusting the war fleets currently changing course toward your position," she snapped. "My name is Sina Voss. I've spent years looking for someone like you. I am not your enemy, Cale Wren, but in about 6 hours half the galaxy is going to be." Vessel Prime's systems flared, confirming her words with brutal clarity. Dozens of new signatures resolving on the star map, warp trails already forming, converging from a dozen directions at once. Not curious ships, not scouts, warships. Cale looked from the star map to the scorched bodies still cooling on the deck behind him, to the endless ancient corridors of a legacy he never asked for and didn't understand, and felt the full, crushing weight of what Vessel Prime had just told him settle into his bones. He wasn't just being hunted anymore. He was a declaration of war, and the war was already on its way. "Section 9, he said into the comm, already running. "I'm coming. You'd better be who you say you are." Sina's voice crackled back, tight with something that sounded almost like fear. "Just move fast, because the fleet leading that convergence isn't here to negotiate, and their commander has hunted things like you before." Sina Voss was not what Cale expected. He'd pictured, in the frantic minutes of running through unfamiliar corridors, some grizzled operative or hardened smuggler. Instead, the woman waiting for him at Section 9 had sharp violet eyes, faint silver markings along her jaw that marked her as only half human, and the exhausted posture of someone who had been fighting a war alone for a very long time. "You're really him," she breathed, staring at Cale like he was something out of a myth she'd stopped believing in years ago. "The last one, it's really true." "It's really. Last time I checked," Cale said warily, still gripping his sidearm. "You said we had 6 hours. That was 3 corridors ago. Start talking." She nodded, already moving, gesturing for him to follow through a service hatch that led deeper into the dreadnought's lower decks. "You need to understand what you just did before you understand what's coming for you. Vessel Prime already gave me the highlights. Precursors, stolen tech, Earth burned to keep the secret buried." "That's the history," Sena said. "I'm talking about the present. 300 years ago, when Earth fell, the empires responsible didn't just walk away afterward. They divided the spoils. Every fragment of precursor technology recovered from your species became the foundation of their power. Fleets, shielding, weapons, even parts of their economies. An entire balance of galactic power was built on the corpse of what your people once had." Cale's jaw tightened. And now a piece of that technology just woke up under new management. "Worse," Sena said. "It woke up under rightful management. Every empire holding stolen precursor fragments knows on some level that the tech never truly recognized them the way it recognizes you. They've spent 3 centuries operating machines that only grudgingly obey them. Now there's proof, walking and breathing, that the true owners of that legacy are not extinct." She stopped at a junction, checking a handheld scanner with shaking hands. "So they signed a treaty. Decades ago, in secret. They called it the Silence Accord." "Let me guess," Kyle said. "It's not about being quiet. It's an extermination clause," Sena said flatly. "Every signatory empire agreed that if humanity ever resurfaced, even one person, that person would be eliminated immediately, before news could spread, before anyone could rally around them. No trials, no mercy. Just silence. Permanent and absolute." The floor seemed to tilt under Cale's feet. He thought of the 3 bounty hunters who had died in the corridor above, hunting him for sport, for trophies. Small, personal cruelty. This was different. This was systemic. Entire governments had looked at the last living human and decided, calmly and bureaucratically, that his existence was a problem requiring solution. "And you know all this how?" he asked. Sena's jaw tightened, old grief flickering behind her violet eyes. "Because my mother spent her life trying to prove the accord existed. She collected fragments, records, testimonies, anything that proved humanity wasn't the monster the histories painted it as, anything that proved what really happened to Earth. She believed if she could get the truth out, someone somewhere would finally have to answer for it." "Believed," Cale repeated softly. "She was executed 11 years ago," Sena said, voice steady with the practiced control of old pain. "Officially for smuggling illegal archives. Unofficially because she got too close to a name she shouldn't have found." Before Cale could ask what name, Vessel Prime's voice cut through both their comms, sharp with alarm. "Heir, multiple warp signatures resolving at the edge of this system. Configuration matches Silence Accord enforcement doctrine. Estimated time to engagement, 11 minutes. Sena went pale. She pulled up a tactical display on her handheld, and Cale watched her expression shift from fear into something colder, harder. Recognition. "That's not a random patrol," she said. "That's a dedicated response fleet, which means someone already flagged this system for enforcement priority before you even finished waking the ship up." She zoomed the display, isolating a flagship signature at the head of the formation, and her hands went very still. "No, not him. Not now." "Who?" Kyle demanded. "The flagship belongs to Warden Commander Thesic," Sena said, and there was a tremor in her voice Cale hadn't heard before, something raw underneath the professional calm she'd worn since they met. "He's the Silence Accord's most senior enforcer. He has personally overseen the elimination of every confirmed human sighting in the last 2 decades. You know him." I know what he did, Sina said, and for the first time she looked away from Kale, staring instead at a point on the deck like she could see straight through it into the past. 11 years ago, when my mother's ship was intercepted for carrying illegal archives about Earth, his ship was the one that fired first. I watched the transmission before it went dark. I know his voice. I'll know it until the day I die. Kale felt something shift in his chest, a grim, unwilling kinship blooming in the silence between them. Two people from different worlds, both carrying the weight of the same kind of loss. Then we don't let him get close enough to fire twice, Kale said. Sina managed a thin, humorless smile. Easier said than done. His fleet outnumbers whatever defenses this ancient dreadnought has left, and Vessel Prime systems have been dormant for 3 centuries. We are not ready for a battle. Confirmed, Vessel Prime said grimly. Current combat readiness 41% and rising. Insufficient for direct confrontation with a fleet of this configuration. The tactical display in Sina's hands flickered, resolving a clearer image of the lead warship as it broke from formation, angling directly toward the derelict's position with the unmistakable confidence of a predator that had done this exact thing many times before. A new signal opened on the comm, unprompted, cutting cleanly through every frequency Vessel Prime monitored, calm, precise, and chillingly patient. This is Warden Commander Thesic of Silence Accord Enforcement, the voice said, and Sina flinched visibly at the sound of it. To whoever has reactivated this vessel, know that resistance changes nothing about the outcome. It only changes how many people die alongside you. The transmission cut. The lead warship's weapons batteries began, one by one, to glow. Sina grabbed Kale's arm, pulling him toward the nearest evacuation route, her voice tight with something between fury and grief. We need to move, now, because that man doesn't make threats, Kale. He only ever makes promises. The first volley hit the dreadnought's outer shielding like a physical scream, and Kale felt the entire structure groan around him as if it were alive and in pain. 41% readiness isn't going to save us, Sina shouted over the tremor, bracing herself against a support beam as sparks rained from an overhead conduit. We need another option right now. There is one, Vessel Prime said, its voice steady even as alarms shredded the air around them. Heir. This vessel responds to direct neural-linked command far more efficiently than manual interface. If you accept full synchronization, response time to threats increases by a factor of 6. What does synchronization actually mean? Kyle asked, already moving toward the command dais rising out of the deck ahead of them, drawn by an instinct he didn't fully trust. It means the ship stops being something you operate and becomes something you are, temporarily. It is not without risk. No living pilot has attempted full synchronization in 3 centuries. And if I don't, then we lose, Vessel Prime said simply. Kyle didn't look at Sina. He didn't need to see her face to know she wanted to argue, to slow him down, to demand safer alternatives that didn't exist. Instead, he stepped onto the dais, and the moment his palms touched the cold interface plating, the world dissolved into light. He wasn't in his body anymore. He was everywhere, in the shield emitters straining against enemy fire, in the ancient engines fighting to hold formation, in 1,000 tiny systems all screaming for a decision only he could make. It should have overwhelmed him completely. Instead, something in him simply understood. Not through training, not through logic, through instinct, sharp and immediate, like a language he'd been born speaking and only just remembered. He redirected power away from decorative defense grids no one needed and funneled it straight into propulsion, spinning the massive dreadnought on an axis it was never designed to move on, dodging fire that should have been unavoidable. He fired countermeasures in patterns that made no tactical sense on paper, chaotic, unpredictable, human, and watched 3 enemy strike craft collide with each other trying to compensate for a maneuver their combat computers hadn't modeled. Unprecedented, Vessel Prime murmured almost to itself, monitoring the exchange with something like disbelief, combat efficiency exceeding all projected baselines. Heir, your tactical patterns are irrational and yet effective, in a manner this system was not designed to anticipate. "Story of my species," Cale muttered through gritted teeth, sweat running down his face as he held the ship together through sheer stubbornness and instinct. The battle turned, slowly, painfully, in their favor. Not because the dreadnought was stronger, but because Kyle refused to fight the way the enemy expected him to. He broke every rule their tactical computers had been trained on, and for the first time since he'd stepped aboard, he understood, in his gut, what Vessel Prime had been trying to tell him. This wasn't just inherited machinery. Something about him mattered here. They forced one enemy cruiser to break off, badly damaged, and Cena, who had taken up position at a secondary console, coordinating countermeasures with sharp, furious focus, managed to disable a boarding pod before it ever reached the hull, trapping its occupant inside. "We've got a prisoner," she said, breathless, adrenaline still thrumming in her voice. "One of Thesic's officers. Might know something useful." They found him in the wreckage of the boarding pod minutes later, a Vectori officer with pale grayscales and a broken arm. More furious than afraid, Cale crouched in front of him, exhaustion from the synchronization still burning through his limbs. "Why does Thesic want me dead so badly? He's leading the fleet personally," Cale asked. "Enforcement commanders don't usually get their hands dirty." The officer sneered, then winced from the pain in his arm. "You don't understand what you are, do you, human? Warden Thesic doesn't chase every human rumor personally. He's chased exactly one target in 30 years with this level of priority." "Which is?" The officer's sneer faltered slightly, some old fear flickering behind his eyes. "Proof. He's spent 3 decades trying to prove Earth's cleansing was never actually completed." Cena went very still beside Cale. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," the officer spat. "There have always been rumors. Survivors smuggled out before the end. A steward vessel that vanished from the historical record instead of being destroyed with the rest. Thesic was there, on the day Earth burned. He spent every year since hunting for something he swore he saw and could never prove." Vessel Prime's systems flickered across every screen in the chamber at once, an unmistakable reaction. "Correction required," the AI said, its voice unusually careful. "Warden Thesic's designation was flagged in this vessel's historical logs prior to dormancy. Cross-referencing now." Cale's stomach turned to ice. "What does that mean?" Before Vessel Prime could answer, every comm channel in the chamber opened at once, overriding the standard frequency, cutting cleanly through the residual static of battle. A new voice, calm, measured, and utterly focused, filled the room. The same voice that had promised, not threatened, less than an hour ago. "Kyle Wren," Thesic said, and there was something in the way he said the name, not like a target's designation, but like a name he had been waiting 300 years to speak aloud. "You fight like someone I once knew. Someone who should not exist anymore. And yet here you stand, using tactics no database should have taught you." Cale exchanged a glance with Cena, whose hand had drifted, white-knuckled, to the weapon at her hip. "You don't know me," Kyle said into the comm. "That," Thesim replied slowly, "is where you are mistaken. I know exactly whose bloodline flows through you, Kyle Wren. I know it better than you do. And there is something about your past, about the true history of Earth's fall, that even Vessel Prime may not have told you yet." The line went silent for a long, deliberate moment, and when Thesic spoke again, his voice had dropped into something almost gentle, almost mournful. "Ask your ship what happened in the final hour before Earth died," he said. "Ask it what, or who, it was truly built to protect. And then ask yourself why a warden who has hunted humans for 30 years just handed you the truth for free." The transmission cut, leaving nothing behind but silence, the wreckage of battle, and a question burning in Cale's chest that he suddenly desperately needed answered. Vessel Prime did not answer the question right away, and the silence told Cale more than any words could have. "You're hesitating," Cale said, standing amid the scorched wreckage of the boarding pod, the captured officer watching warily from where Cena had restrained him. "You don't hesitate. Tell me what happened the day Earth died." "I am recalculating how to present information that was, until this moment, classified beyond your clearance level," Vessel Prime admitted. "Very well. The truth, heir, is this. Earth was not destroyed simply because a hostile coalition feared what humanity had inherited. Earth was destroyed because humanity was 3 days away from understanding what that inheritance actually was. Kyle's breath caught. Understanding it how? Your scientists had begun deciphering fragments of precursor architecture buried beneath human soil for millennia, architecture identical to the foundational systems of this very vessel. They were close, dangerously close to unlocking its true function. The coalition that struck Earth did not do so out of simple conquest. They did so out of panic. They believed that if humanity completed that discovery, the balance of power across known space would collapse overnight. Sina stepped closer, her voice tight. What was Earth on the verge of discovering? That, Vessel Prime said, requires context regarding this vessel's true purpose, which I am not yet prepared to disclose. You're stalling, Kale snapped. I am protecting you, the AI replied. And for the first time, something like genuine strain colored its synthetic voice. Some truths are dangerous even to the person they belong to. Before Kale could push further, a priority channel forced itself open again. Thesic, requesting direct contact, this time alone, unencrypted, without the posturing of command rank behind it. Kale accepted the call against Sina's visible objection. You didn't answer my question, Kale said. Vessel Prime won't either. It's protecting you the only way it knows how, Thesic said, and his voice sounded older now, worn down by something heavier than duty. I was there, Kale, 26 years old, a junior officer aboard the flagship that led the strike on Earth. I watched the order come down. I watched command justify it as necessary, as mercy even, framing genocide as prevention. I told myself I was simply following orders, the way young officers always do. A pause, heavy with old guilt, and then I watched 3 evacuation shuttles slip past our blockade in the chaos, carrying human survivors I was ordered to pursue and destroy. You didn't, Kyle said slowly, understanding dawning like a physical weight. I falsified the pursuit logs, Thesic said quietly. Reported total elimination. It was the only act of defiance I had the courage for that day, and I have spent every year since trying to earn back whatever was left of my conscience. Another pause. One of those shuttles carried a family whose descendants I have quietly protected ever since, moving them out of danger whenever Silence Accord patrols came too close, covering their tracks, keeping them alive without ever letting them know why. Kyle's knees nearly buckled. My family. Your bloodline, Thesic confirmed. You were never simply a survivor who stumbled onto this vessel by chance, Kale. Your ancestors were chosen generations ago by people who believed humanity's legacy needed to outlive the coalition that tried to erase it. I helped keep that thread alive, quietly, at terrible personal risk, because I could not undo what I had already done. But I could make sure it didn't end there. Sina's voice cut in, raw with old grief, finally finding its target. And my mother? She died trying to expose exactly what you just confessed. Did you know that? Did you know your silence cost her life? The calm went quiet for a long, agonized moment. I knew, Thesic said finally, voice breaking. I could not intervene without exposing everything I had spent decades protecting. It was the second worst decision of my life, and I have carried it every day since. I am sorry, Senavos. It changes nothing. But it is true. Kyle watched Sena's face crumple and reharden in the same breath, grief and fury locked in silent battle behind her eyes. She said nothing, but she didn't reach for her weapon either, and Kyle understood that was its own kind of answer. Why tell us this now? Kale asked. Because hardliners within the Silence Accord have discovered fragments of my betrayal, Thesic said, urgency sharpening his voice. My falsified logs, my protection of your bloodline. It's unraveling faster than I can contain it. They are moving against me even as we speak, and they will move against you next with far greater force than what you've already faced. There is a location, Kale. Coordinates buried in this vessel's oldest archives. A place the precursors built specifically for a human heir to reach. Vessel Prime has been protecting its location for 3 centuries, waiting for someone worthy enough, or simply desperate enough to go there. What's there? The true inheritance, Thesic said. Not this ship. Not weapons, not fleets, not conquest. Something the Coalition feared far more than any of that. I can guide you to it, but I need to move now before... The transmission dissolved into violent static. Thesic? Kale shouted into the dead channel. Thesic! Warden Thesic's flagship signature has just gone dark, Vessel Prime reported grimly, tactical readouts flooding the display in urgent red. Debris field detected at his last known coordinates, survival probability, critically low. Cena stared at the screen, jaw tight, eyes wet despite everything. He just confessed to helping cause my mother's death and I still don't want him dead, she said quietly, almost to herself, like the realization hurt more than the anger had. Before either of them could process the loss, Vessel Prime's sensors screamed a fresh warning, and the star map lit up with a new signature. Not one ship, but an entire armada, dropping out of warp directly above their position, larger and more heavily armed than anything they had faced yet, formation markings unmistakably belonging to the Silence Accord's highest command. Heir, Vessel Prime said, voice tight with something dangerously close to fear. I am detecting a full Accord battle fleet. Given current damage levels and our depleted defenses, survival probability for this vessel has just dropped below 4%. Kyle looked at the wreckage around him, at Sena's stricken face, at the dark and silent channel where Thesic's voice had been seconds ago, and felt the full, crushing weight of everything closing in at once. Then we'd better become the exception, he said, though his voice shook as he said it, because I am not dying 3 days after I found out what I actually am. Above them, the Armada's weapons batteries began, in perfect unison, to charge. 4% survival was not 0, and Kale had spent his entire life proving that math wrong. He didn't run to the command dais this time. He walked, because his hands had finally stopped shaking, and because some quiet, certain part of him had already decided what needed to happen. Vessel Prime, he said, give me the coordinates Thesic was talking about. The true inheritance now. Heir, given the tactical situation, diverting power toward navigation instead of defense will accelerate our destruction. I'm not asking you to run, Kale said. I'm asking you to trust me the way you've been claiming to for the last 3 hours. A pause, longer than any Vessel Prime had taken before. Then quietly, coordinates transmitted. They lead to a sealed chamber at this vessel's core, a location I was instructed never to reveal except under conditions of absolute necessity. I'd say we've hit those conditions, Cena said grimly, already moving toward the internal transit line, glancing back at Kale with something new in her expression. Not just trust, but a kind of desperate hope she seemed almost afraid to feel. They ran through corridors shuddering under sustained bombardment, Vessel Prime diverting every scrap of remaining power into shielding just long enough to keep the ship from coming apart around them. Alarms screamed continuously now, no longer discreet warnings but one long, unbroken cry. Twice the deck buckled beneath their feet. Once, an entire support pillar collapsed behind them, sealing off the corridor they'd just left. They reached the chamber with less than 2 minutes of structural integrity left, according to Vessel Prime's increasingly urgent countdown. The room at the Dreadnought's core was small, smaller than Kale expected, smaller than anything else on this vast, ancient ship. No weapons, no throne, just a single pedestal of dark, unfamiliar material, and resting atop it, a simple crystalline core pulsing faintly with light, patient and quiet amid the chaos tearing through the ship around it. This, Vessel Prime said softly, is the true inheritance, not a weapon, not an empire, a message and a covenant left by the precursors 9,000 years ago. A message saying what? Kale demanded, hand hovering over the pulsing core as the deck shook violently beneath him. That they searched the stars for millennia looking for a species capable of holding immense power without immediately using it to dominate others, Vessel Prime said. Every other civilization they tested took that power and built empires, subjugated rivals, repeated the same cycles of conquest that had already destroyed the precursor's own kind. Humanity was different, flawed, chaotic, often cruel to itself, but capable again and again throughout your short history of choosing mercy when domination would have been easier. They believed you were worth the risk. They built this inheritance not as a crown for a conqueror, but as a key, meant to be turned only by someone who earned it through survival and choice. Not bloodshed. Cale's hand closed around the core, and understanding flooded through him. Not information exactly, but certainty, the same instinctive knowledge that had let him fly this ship like he'd been born to it. That's why they killed Earth, he breathed. Not because we discovered a weapon, because we were about to prove exactly what the precursors hoped, that we deserved this. Precisely, Vessel Prime said, and the coalition that struck Earth has spent 3 centuries terrified of the day someone would finally reach this chamber and prove it again. The ship rocked violently, throwing Senna against the wall. Warning klaxons screamed that the outer hull was failing. And then, through the static and chaos, a new signal broke through, battered, weak, but unmistakably alive. Cale. Thessic's voice, ragged with pain but very much present. I'm not dead yet. Neither is my crew. We rammed our escape pod into their forward battery. Bought you time, not much. Whatever you're planning, finish it now. Relief and fury and gratitude collided in Cena's expression all at once, and she said nothing. But Cale saw her hand press briefly, silently, against her chest. Cale turned back to the pulsing core, both hands wrapped around it now, and made his choice. Not to seize power, not to claim an empire, but to finish what 9,000 years of waiting had built toward. Open it, he said. Broadcast everything, Earth's history, the Silence Accord, all of it. Let the whole galaxy see exactly what they tried to bury. Heir, this action cannot be undone. Every empire in known space will hear the truth simultaneously. There is no controlling what happens after. Good, Cale said. We've let them control the story for 300 years. That ends now. The core flared, brilliant and blinding, and Vessel Prime's system surged with power the dreadnought hadn't held since before Earth fell. Every screen across the ship, and, Cale would later learn, across 1,000 other systems where fragments of stolen precursor technology still operated, lit up with the same transmission. Earth's true history, the Coalition's genocide, the Silence Accord's decades of quiet murder, and finally, undeniably footage of Cale himself standing at the heart of humanity's rightful inheritance, alive, unconquered, and free. The Accord armada above them, weapons still charged and aimed, hesitated, because their own crews were staring at the same broadcast, watching their government's oldest secret unravel in real time, watching centuries of carefully maintained lies collapse under the weight of simple, undeniable truth. It took hours for the fighting to fully stop. It took days for the political fallout to truly begin, empires turning on each other, alliances built on the Silence Accord's foundation cracking apart as citizens across 1,000 worlds demanded answers their leaders could no longer hide. Thessic survived, badly wounded, and stood trial not as history's villain but as the one officer who had chosen conscience over orders, a complicated, imperfect hero. The galaxy wasn't quite sure how to judge, and didn't need to, not yet. Kyle stood weeks later in the observation deck of Vessel Prime, watching a sky full of stars that no longer hid what they had done. Cena stood beside him, quieter than usual, grief and something like peace finally sitting easier together in her expression. Thessic, leaning heavily on a cane, arm still in a sling, joined them without a word, watching the same sky. Historical log entry updated, Vessel Prime said softly, breaking the silence. Species status, human. Classification, no longer extinct. Kyle let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 300 years, even though he'd only been alive for 30 of them. What happens now? Cena asked quietly. Cale looked out at the stars. No longer just a graveyard, no longer just a hiding place, but somewhere his people, however few, however scattered, finally had the right to stand and be seen. Now, he said, we find out what humanity does when nobody's hunting us anymore. Beside him, Vessel Prime's light glowed steady and warm, and for the first time since Kale had stumbled aboard, the ancient ship felt less like a weapon waiting for war, and more like exactly what it always should have been. A home, finally, for the last of humanity to become the first of what came next.